Hi there, Catherine Mattice. I am the conference chair this year for the International Association on Workplace Bullying and Harassment. The conference is here in San Diego, USA. Never been in the United States before, so I am super excited to be the chair to bring the conference over this direction. The conference has been in play for 26 years. We have it every other year. So this is the 13th conference. I'm joined by Joy Hulton. She is one of our conference speakers, and it's great to meet you, Joy. How's it going?
Great. It's great to meet you as well.
Thank you. So you are going to be focusing your presentation on the police force, and I'm curious, what are some of the key factors in, that are related to harassment in the police services?
So there's a number of cultural factors, but there's probably three key things that we find that are systemic that contribute to harassment and bullying in policing. And one is, despite the efforts in recent years of police services to diversify their workforce, there is still a very homogeneous workforce in most police services. There's a lack of diversity of gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. And so that does contribute to systemic causes of harassment and bullying. Those that are marginalized still do experience being treated as others in the workplace. So that is one key factor. Along the same lines is there's still, again, despite efforts to diversify, particularly along gender lines, there's still a very dominant type of masculinity that's valued in policing, similar to what we see in the military. And so, personas or characteristics that are other than that, either that are in any way feminine or other expressions of masculinity, again, don't tend to be valued by the majority of members. And so that again causes harassment and bullying along the lines of misogyny, homophobic, discrimination, or just sort of othering, treating people as not being tough enough. So that's still, again, despite good efforts to try to diversify, is a dominant trait. And the third is, again, despite efforts in recent years to address the mental health issues and the realities that first responders face, there is still often a culture where there's an expectation for people to be tough. You have to be tough to do the job, and therefore you should be tough enough to take a joke, to take whether it's hazing of new people or just jokes on the job. And there's often a lack of understanding of why something that might not seem that serious to someone could be so harmful, because all day long they do really tough work in very difficult circumstances. How come they can't just take a joke?
Take a joke, yeah.
And often we see dark humor is used as a stress relief for first responders, and again, without an appreciation of how harmful that can be for some people. So those are three key factors that are fairly prevalent in the policing world.
I hadn't thought about that third one necessarily before. I mean, I think we'd all know military and police, those first two risk factors, but hadn't thought about that kind of joke. You're out in the harsh world and the harsh realities. Why would my stupid little joke bother you? Without recognizing that it absolutely does. Does the definition of harassment differ in Canadian jurisdictions compared to the US? And also, tell us a little bit about that. How does that dictate how this is handled?
So harassment and discrimination are generally defined in each of the provinces, although there is also a Canada Labour Code that applies to the federally regulated sectors. But all the definitions, they go beyond Human Rights Code grounds. So our definition of harassment is not limited to harassment based on, race, gender, age. It's really behavior, comments, or conducts that is known or reasonably to be known to be unwelcome. And so it does tend to be a broader definition that is not limited. And I often find when I'm advising employers, I caution them that if they're reading material out of the United States, that they have to make that differentiation, that our definition is actually broader.
And better, so, broader and better.
I would say better, to be honest. I mean, it certainly captures a broader range of behaviors on the spectrum. So even things that might be considered incivility could be captured as harassment. We don't have a statutory definition of bullying, but typically bullying would be included. And sometimes it's referred to as personal harassment or psychological harassment if it's not based on a human rights code ground. It also it supports a finding of toxic work environment. So you can make a formal finding of harassment based on a toxic boss, for example. They don't have to have had any particular human rights code grounds. So I do think that the broader definition is better and allows the employer to, in a formal way, deal with a broader range of behaviors. Sometimes it's a challenge for investigators to make findings of fact because it's a little bit harder to pin it down if it's, it's a little easier if you can say it was based on gender or sexual orientation or race. Sometimes it's a little harder to distinguish between, a toxic boss and just sort of bad management, right? Sometimes it's a little gray, and investigators will sometimes find that harder. And what I find is in policing, there tends to be a desire to have it very defined in fact, to be able to make a very clear factual finding. So that can sometimes be a challenge. But on the flip side, we are able to capture that broader spectrum of behavior. But I do find sometimes I have to sort of undo the myth that it has to be limited to our human rights code grounds.
Yeah, I guess it would be a little bit out of the cultural, or a lot of it out of the cultural norm if you're doing an investigation in the police force to use the fluffy stuff that's hard to really pin down because they certainly operate in a world of facts through all the work that they're doing. And I hope, or I think you'll have a lot to share with the US investigators that will be at the conference related to how you go about investigating, because I'm in California, or the conference is going to be in California. And, we just added abusive conduct to part of our harassment prevention training. And then all of a sudden, all of these investigators are being asked to investigate bullying or abusive conduct, and definitely finding it difficult. So I feel like you'd have a lot to share with the US people who are investigating bullying complaints.
Yeah, it definitely is more challenging, but it is, we've had these provisions in our legislation, I would say over the last 8 to 10 years, depending on which province you're in Canada. So a little bit of time to build up some knowledge and experience and expertise in that area. Not a lot, but it certainly has built up over the last number of years.
Yeah. And what are some of the things that the Canadian police are doing to address bullying and harassment? And is that what your presentation's on?
Well, yes. So I'm going to focus on dealing with bullying and harassment specifically within policing, because this is an area that right across the country, the police services recognize that they have to address. And it's come out largely from work done around addressing the mental health of police officers and recognizing that we have to do more to support our first responders, and a recognition that not all of their mental stress comes from sort of out in the public or on the road. A lot of it comes often from inside the workplace. And so that has to be part of it. So part of it is a recognition of the importance of creating psychological safety and addressing mental health. They are trying to work on not just diversity, but equity and inclusion. So they've over the last number of years been trying to attract more diverse candidates, haven't necessarily addressed what happens once they arrive. So the equity and the inclusion and the belonging, trying to address prevention by changing some of those systemic drivers that I described earlier. Another big topic that's growing in, I would say, prominence within the police services is the understanding of the bystander effect, and trying to help police officers as co-workers intervene, because there's definitely, a sense that you don't speak up, you don't rat each other out. It's very ingrained in police culture that, you have each other's back, and having each other back historically has meant, you don't tell on each other.
Right.
And they're trying to change the culture to mean having your back means if someone's mistreating you, I'm going to step up and I'm going to support you. So there are a growing number of Canadian Police Services that are looking to bring bystander intervention training and principles into their workplace. And then leadership. They're really taking a look at what should be the competencies of police leaders, both uniform and civilian, and trying to bring in more competencies around empathy and compassion, but also conflict resolution.
Yeah.
I've since doing this work over the last number of years, I've been amazed at how police officers are trained to resolve conflict out in the public. They don't really intuitively apply those same principles to each other in their workplace.
Yeah.
So police leaders are being encouraged to upskill their fairly basic conflict resolution skills and deal with things when and where they happen.
Yeah.
So those are some key common things that are occurring in services large and small right across the country.
Yeah, we've done some work, Civility Partners, my firm, we worked with a university and did some of that same stuff where we looked at their performance management system and then created competencies in addition to the ones they already had related to ability to be inclusive and empathetic and lead a positive, respectful team. And so I do think I like that, the competencies, and then of course holding people accountable to them is a whole nother step.
Yeah. And accountability is obviously an issue. I would say the one challenge, I think a real challenge in policing is they're so process driven. Everything they do has a policy. It has a standard operating procedure, and trying to get them to understand that you can't process map your way out of this. You have to address the culture, not just policies and processes. That is a challenge.
Yeah.
Because they're just an environment that is almost completely driven and dependent on process and protocol for a good reason. But now I think there's a recognition amongst police leaders that you have to address the culture of police too.
Yeah, and that also adds, that's another risk factor, right? Bureaucratic organizations that are too process driven are definitely at risk, and it makes it very difficult to turn the culture around. So, well, thank you, Joy, for joining me. It was great to meet you, and I look forward to hearing more on your presentation. For listeners, come to San Diego in September. We'll get you the links down in the comments, and please join us and come and talk about harassment and bullying in police, in all sorts of other industries, higher education, healthcare. This is going to be a fantastic conference. We have over 100 presentations. It's going to be awesome. All right. Thank you, Joy.
Great. Thank you.